I met this man, and from the very first moment I thought he was everything I had ever dreamed of. I still remember the way he looked when we first locked eyes, his smile so confident, his eyes warm, yet filled with a depth that made me feel like I could lose myself in them forever. He had that rare quality of being both charming and genuine, as if his kindness was woven into the fabric of his being. I remember feeling this wave of excitement, like I had stumbled upon something extraordinary. He was affectionate, thoughtful, and to me, absolutely gorgeous, handsome in a way that made me feel like I had won some kind of lottery, like I was the luckiest person on the planet just for being in his presence. The connection between us was immediate, so deep and effortless that it felt like we had known each other for years, even though we had just met. It wasn't just that we got along, we clicked in a way that made everything seem so easy. Conversations flowed seamlessly, and our silences were comfortable. We didn't have to try to make it work, it just did. It was as if we were meant to be together, and every day we spent together only made that belief stronger. The joy we found in each other's presence was something I had never known before. We spent every possible moment together, sharing laughter, comfort, and an intimacy I hadn't known was possible. It didn't take long for us to fall in love. It was like a wildfire, fast, passionate, all-consuming. 3 months into our whirlwind romance, we were engaged, and just 3 months after that, we were married. The wedding felt like something out of a fairy tale, a day I had dreamed about for as long as I could remember. The ceremony was beautiful, and everything seemed perfect, from the vows we exchanged to the guests' smiles and the way he held my hand as we stood together, promising each other forever. Our honeymoon was everything I had hoped for, breathtaking, full of memories, laughter, and a sense of adventure that made me believe we could conquer anything together. At that point, I couldn't have been happier. It was like my life had fallen into place, and I was living the dream. It had been 2 years since we said our vows, 2 years of love, passion, and what I thought was the perfect marriage. But there was something I didn't anticipate, the emotional complexity that came with being in a relationship like this. I had never been with anyone before him, so the experience of sharing such an intimate bond was completely new to me. In the beginning, it was like I was floating on a cloud, swept away by the perfection of it all. But one morning, the morning after our wedding, still in the glow of the celebration, I woke up with an odd feeling. I couldn't explain it. Something felt off. My heart felt heavy in a way that I hadn't experienced before. Tears started flowing down my face without any warning, and I had no idea why. Was it the loss of my innocence, the closing of a chapter in my life that I hadn't quite understood? Or was it something deeper, an unfamiliar realization that I was now tied to someone in a way that could never be undone? What stood out to me the most, though, was how my husband seemed to be acting differently. His warmth, which had once felt so constant, seemed to fade. His touch was less frequent, his smiles more distant. He was colder now, not in any obvious way, but in subtle shifts that I couldn't ignore. When I asked him what was wrong, he brushed it off, insisting it was nothing. But I knew deep down that something had changed. A part of me wanted to believe him, to brush it aside and return to the blissful state we had once shared, but that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. At first, we lived with his parents while we figured out our next steps, and it seemed like a cozy arrangement. It gave us time to adjust, to settle into married life before taking on the responsibility of a place of our own. But after a while, we decided it was time to get our own space, a home that would be ours. Moving into our own house felt like a fresh start, a new chapter in our lives. It should have been exciting, but the honeymoon phase didn't last as long as I had hoped. Not long after settling in, I began to notice something that troubled me. My husband, whom I had always known to be clean and sober, had started picking up an old habit, smoking weed. It wasn't something I was used to, and at first I didn't think much of it. But then I realized it wasn't just occasional, he was smoking it every day. I had thought he had quit years ago, so this change in him threw me off. It was like he had slipped back into a part of his life that I didn't understand, a part that seemed so far removed from the person I thought I knew. Occasionally, he would experiment with other drugs, Little things at first, a pill here or there, trying to chase a high, escape reality, or just for fun, he'd say. But it wasn't just about the drugs. It was the fact that he seemed to be escaping from something, and I couldn't figure out what it was. This wasn't my world. I had never been around drugs before, had never seen them as part of my reality. But somehow, as the days turned into months, we still managed to get closer. I wanted to believe that it was a phase, that it would pass. I wanted to think that if I just tried hard enough, I could help him quit, that somehow, I could fix this. But deep down, I knew it wasn't something I could change. The change had to come from him. I couldn't force him to do something he wasn't ready for. As time went on, I started to notice other changes, small things at first, things I could brush off as coincidences, but then they started to add up. How could someone who had once adored me, who had been so attentive, become so distant? How could the man who once made me feel like the center of his world become someone I barely recognized? It didn't make sense, and it began to eat away at me. I started noticing little things, scratches on his body, strange marks on our sheets, stains on the bed and walls that I couldn't explain. I tried to tell myself they were just accidents, just minor, inconsequential things. But as they kept happening, the same doubts began to surface again. The unease. The fear. And then, one day, I discovered a bank charge that made my stomach drop. It was for something that didn't sit right with me. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was for a game. But the more I pressed, the more his story changed. Eventually, he admitted the truth. He had paid for a live video chat with another woman. I could feel my chest tighten as the words sank in. My mind raced, trying to process it. This wasn't just a mistake, it felt like a betrayal. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to hold it together. To him, it was just a slip-up, a one-time thing, but to me, it felt like a red flag, a warning sign that I couldn't ignore. I told him, calmly but firmly, that if anything else ever happened, I couldn't stay. I couldn't accept betrayal in any form. He promised it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't fully grasping the weight of what had happened. About a month later, I found something else that made my heart drop, a lipstick stain on a glass in our dishwasher. It wasn't mine. It couldn't be. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. My mind began racing, and I couldn't stop myself from searching for answers. I looked through his car, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain what was happening. And that's when I found it, beneath the spare tire compartment, a pantyhose sock, one that matched the lipstick color, and a pack of condoms tucked under the driver's seat. I confronted him, and of course, he had an answer for everything. He claimed the lipstick stain could have been mine, though I knew it wasn't. The sock? He insisted it belonged to his mother, even though the car had been cleaned out just a few days before. And the condoms? He said they were for an outdoor adventure we had planned. I wanted so badly to believe him, but something inside me refused to let go of the nagging feeling that I was being lied to. A few months later, the bombshell hit. He went out for the day, telling me he was meeting friends. I encouraged him to go, thinking it might be good for him to have some time away from me. But when he came home that night, it was nearly 1 a.m., and he was a mess. He was crying, clearly intoxicated, his body shaking. He told me he had done drugs, gone to a massage parlor, and had some girl grind on him. But he swore, over and over, that he hadn't gone any further. What frightened him the most was that he thought he might have contracted herpes. I checked, but I didn't see anything. The worry, the fear in his eyes, made me question everything. Against my better judgment, I stayed. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but I was already preparing to leave. The emotional toll was too much. Over the following weeks, things seemed to settle, but then he asked me to stop bringing up the past, to move on and forget everything that had happened. But how could I? How could I just pretend like nothing was wrong when everything felt so broken? Eventually, he turned off the location sharing on his phone again. He claimed he didn't believe in that kind of relationship. That was when I realized, this wasn't just about the mistakes. It was about who he had become, who we had become. By October, his mental health had spiraled, and everything came crashing down. He told his family that our marriage wasn't working, that I was to blame for his unhappiness. He was convinced that a trip to Bali would reset him, fix everything. What I didn't know, though, was that he had been planning something far worse. And the cycle continued.